Hello everyone. In my last video, I used Lagrangian mechanics to derive the equations of motion of a double pendulum undergoing small oscillations. And at the end, I summarized the equations of motion that we derived as a vector equation, which is the equation that I've written down on this slide here, right? So if you'd like to see where these equations of motion come from, take a look at my previous video. What we're going to do today is actually solve these equations of motion and see how the two angles, θ1 and θ2, that define this double pendulum evolve with time. Okay, so first thing to notice is this looks kind of like a simple harmonic motion equation, except it's in vector form, right? Our standard simple harmonic motion equation is like x double dot plus omega squared x is equal to 0. So this looks kind of like that, except our x's are vectors, and we've also got some matrices pre-multiplying these vectors. So that gives us a hint that we could try an oscillatory solution, right? In other words, we could try a solution of the form θ1, θ2 as a vector is equal to some constant vector, which I'm going to call θ1, 0 and θ2, 0 times some oscillating term cos of some angular frequency omega times time plus some phase, right? So this is like the most general oscillating vector that we could come up with, assuming that they oscillate with the same frequency, right? Now, because we've assumed that θ1 and θ2 oscillate with the same frequency, the types of motion that we're going to get are called normal modes, right? So by definition, a normal mode is a type of motion in which all parts of the system are oscillating with the same angular frequency. Okay, so what we can do is just substitute this trial solution into the equations of motion and see what happens, right? First thing to notice is that if you take the time derivative twice of our trial solution, you find that θ1 double dot and θ2 double dot is going to be, well, when you differentiate the cosine term, right, the first time you differentiate it, you get a factor of minus omega, right, from the chain rule, and the cos turns into a sine, and so the first time derivative you would get a factor of minus sine omega t plus phi, but then you differentiate that again and it turns into minus omega squared, and then the sine turns back into a cos, right? So when you differentiate it twice, you just basically pull out a factor of minus omega squared. You've still got your constant vector θ1, 0, θ2, 0, but your oscillating cos term hasn't changed, right? So cos of omega t plus phi, where phi is just some phase. All right. So if we take that expression for the vector of second time derivatives, substitute it into the original equation, what happens? Well, we are going to get minus omega squared times that matrix 2, 1, 1, 1 times θ1, 0, θ2, 0. And then I'm not even going to bother writing in the cos term, right? Because you're going to get a cos term attached to that first vector of second time derivatives. You're going to get the same cos term attached to the second vector, which is just the angles themselves, right? And so because cos of omega t plus phi is not identically equal to 0, we're free to just divide through by that cosine term. So there we go. Now, that means all I have to do is add on G over L times the second matrix 2, 0, 0, 1 times our vector of constants θ1, 0, θ2, 0, and that whole thing is supposed to be 0. Okay, so what can we do with that? Well, we've now got the same vector appearing twice, right, there and there. And so we could combine this, we could combine the two terms into a single term where we have some big matrix times that vector θ1, 0, θ2, 0 is equal to 0. So the way we figure out what that bigger matrix is just by combining the two matrices that we've got here, right? In other words, that one and that one. So if you think about it, the first entry of this matrix, well, you're going to get minus 2 omega squared, right? Because there's a minus omega squared and then a 2 there. And then you're going to get a plus 2g over L because there's g over L there and a 2 there. So I can write the first entry actually as 2g over L minus 2 omega squared, like that. All right, now what about the top right entry of this matrix? Well, you don't get any contribution from the second matrix because there's a 0 there. The first matrix just contributes a 1 times minus omega squared, so I'm just going to put minus omega squared there. right? Similarly, for the bottom left entry of the matrix, there's a 0 in the second one, so that doesn't contribute anything, and we just get a minus omega squared there. And for the final term, final entry of the matrix, again, just by inspecting the two matrices at the bottom left, you're going to get a G over L from the second matrix, and then a minus omega squared from the first one. And there we go. That matrix times theta 1, 0, theta 2, 0 should be the 0 vector. All right. So this is, there are different ways in which this could be solved, right? The obvious way in which it could be solved is that if this matrix has an inverse, you pre-multiply both sides of this equation by the inverse, but that matrix times the 0 vector will still be the 0 vector. And so we would find that theta 1, 0 and theta 2, 0 are both 0. In other words, the pendulum just sits there and doesn't do anything. Now, that's a perfectly valid solution. It's just not the interesting solution. So we've got to think about how to find the solution in the case where the pendulum actually does something, right? So the only other possibility is for this matrix not to be invertible, right? If it's not invertible, then you can't just pre-multiply by the inverse and find that your theta 1, 0, theta 2, 0 vector is 0. So if we are requiring this matrix not to have an inverse, right? In other words, if we want to think about the case where theta 1, 0, theta 2, 0 is not the 0 vector, we want this first matrix, which I'm going to call just A for notational convenience. We want the determinant of that matrix to be 0, right? That's the condition for a matrix not to be invertible. So I'm going to say the determinant of A is 0. Now, if we use our standard formula for the determinant, it's that term times that term minus that term times that term. If we apply that formula, we are going to get a polynomial equation which we could solve for omega, right? Which we don't actually know the value of yet, right? So our determinant expression, well, the first term, we're going to get 2, and then we're going to get G over L minus omega squared all squared, right? If you think about it, because this top left term is just 2 times the bottom left term, then I'm going to have to subtract off this times this, which is omega to the power of 4. So all of that stuff is supposed to be 0 if I'm requiring the determinant of that matrix to be 0. All right, so let's simplify that. Well, if I expand the squared brackets and collect terms together, one of the terms is going to be 2 times omega to the power of 4, but then we subtract off another omega to the power of 4. So overall, you've got just 1 omega to the power of 4, right? Then you're going to get a term which is 2 times twice the product of those two things, which is overall minus 4 omega squared G over L, right? Then the final term is going to be the constant term, which comes from that G over L squared, but it's multiplied by 2, and so it is plus 2 G over L all squared. That is supposed to be 0. Now, this is really, it's a quartic equation, fourth order equation for omega, but it's kind of like a quadratic because you've only got an omega 4 term and an omega to the, omega squared term and a constant term. So it's really quadratic in omega squared. So we could solve this using standard methods for quadratic equations, like completing the square, for example, which is what I'm going to do very quickly. So if we complete the square, we get omega squared minus 2g over L, all squared, right? Now, if you think about it, if I expand these squared brackets, the second term I would get would be 4 times g over L all squared. I want to have 2 times g over L all squared, so I've got to subtract off 2 g over L all squared. Right, so there we go. We've completed the square. If we just rearrange this, what's going to happen? Well, first we would take that term, put it on the other side, and then we would take the square root of both sides, and then we would move that term to the other side. Okay. I'm assuming that if you're watching this video, you're probably pretty experienced with solving quadratic equations, so I'm not going to go through that step by step, but basically you're going to get omega squared is equal to 2g over L plus or minus the square root of 2 times g over L, right? The square root of 2 comes from rooting that term there. Now, conveniently, you can factor out g over L. I guess it has to be that way dimensionally anyway, but there we go. So we can factor that out and get 2 plus or minus root 2 times g over L. Now, if I take the square root of the whole thing, right, then I find that omega itself is going to be this interesting, kind of nice looking number, the square root of 2 plus or minus root 2 times the square root of g over L. Now notice I haven't bothered to put a plus or minus there because of the fact that cosine is an even function. And so whether you have a negative angular frequency or positive angular frequency, it's really physically representing the same solution. So we've solved for omega, but how about theta 10 and theta 20 themselves? Well, to figure that out, let's return our attention to this matrix equation involving A, right, that we had down here. Now, I want to focus for now on the equation that you'd get by considering the second component of that vector equation, right? In other words, if you think about what the second component of that vector equation says, if we do the matrix multiplication, we get minus omega squared theta 10, right? From that times that. And then you would have to add on that times that. So plus g over L minus omega squared times theta 20 is equal to 0. Now, if you rearrange that just a little bit, you find that the ratio of theta 20 to theta 10 should be omega squared over g over L minus omega squared. All right. So let's see what we can do with that, how that simplifies. It turns out to actually simplify very nicely. Because, okay, so theta 20 over theta 10, we know the value of omega. In fact, the first thing I'm going to do is multiply up by L over G. So we get omega squared L over G over 1 minus omega squared L over G. All right. The nice thing about this is we know from down here, remember, that omega squared L over G is 2 plus or minus root 2. All right. And so I can say this is equal to 2 plus or minus root 2 on the top. On the bottom, we've got 1 minus that whole thing, right? So if you do 1 minus 2, you just get minus 1. And then because of the minus sign, we flip the sign of the third part. And so I'm going to write that as minus plus. We get minus 1 minus or plus root 2. Now, your first instinct with this may be to try and rationalize the denominator because that's what we're taught to do from a young age, right? So let's see how that works out here, because it does actually help. If I want to rationalize the denominator, remember I've got to flip the sign of the third part. I'm basically timesing by minus 1 plus or minus root 2 over minus 1 plus or minus root 2, right? Because it was minus or plus, and I've had to flip the sign, so I've changed it into plus or minus. If we go through and do the multiplication of those two fractions, right, on the top, we are going to get a minus 2 from 2 times minus 1, right? Then the next term is going to be plus or minus root 2 times plus or minus root 2, which is always positive and just equal to 2, right? So I get a plus 2. Now, what else do I get? I get 2 times plus or minus root 2, right? So that's just plus or minus 2 root 2. And then I get plus or minus root 2 times minus 1, and the minus 1 basically flips the plus or minus upside down. So I'm going to get minus or plus root 2, like that. Now on the denominator, this is like a difference of 2 squares. This is how rationalizing the denominator works, right? It's difference of 2 squares. So I get 1 squared minus the square root of 2 squared, which is just 2. So the bottom is basically just 1 minus 2, all right? Now, this simplifies very nicely because the whole numbers on the top cancel out. You can combine these root 2's together because they're the same type of term. And overall, that is just equal to plus or minus 1 lot of root 2 on the top. We divide it by minus 1, and we end up with minus or plus root 2. So the ratio of theta 20 to theta 10 has to be minus or plus root 2, depending on whether you took the plus sign with the frequency or the minus sign with the frequency. Now, this is actually the best we can do, right? All we can do without further information is find the ratio of theta 20 to theta 10. The reason for that is, remember that we required the determinant of the matrix A to be 0. Now, one way of looking at what that means is that the rows or the columns of the matrix are linearly dependent, right? And so if we had gone through, we focused on this equation here, right, which came from doing that times that minus that times that, you could have formed another equation where you do that times that plus that times that. But because of the fact that we required the rows and columns of the matrix to be linearly dependent, right, we would have ended up with exactly the same result. And so that wouldn't give us any further information. So what does all of this mean? Well, we've come up with two solutions, right? We've found one possible solution is that omega, I'm going to call it, let's say omega plus because it's got a plus sign in it. One of those solutions for omega is the square root of 2 plus root 2 times root of g over L. Root of g over L. The vector of theta 10, theta 20 corresponding to that is proportional to 1 and then minus root 2, right? Because of that ratio that we just found there. What this actually looks like physically is that your top one, let's say that the top particle moves some distance to the right, but then the lower particle moves in the opposite direction. It goes to the left, and it has an angle, right? The angle that lower rod makes with the vertical is root 2 times bigger than the angle that the top one makes with the vertical. And so it's kind of like an anti-symmetric type of motion. This is the higher frequency type of motion, right? So this particle is moving that way, and this particle is moving that way. Okay, now the other solution is that I'm going to call this one omega minus. That's the square root of 2 minus root 2 times root of g over L. The vector corresponding to that motion is theta 10, theta 20 is proportional to just 1 and then positive root 2 this time. So what this corresponds to is because they have the same sign, the 1 and the root 2 are both positive, right? If the top mass moves some distance to the right, then the lower mass actually moves a little bit further to the right, like that, right? And so at a particular instant, there might be, well, they'll both be moving in the same direction. So they might be moving back towards equilibrium there. Okay. So these are called the normal modes. There's two different normal modes of the double pendulum. One way to understand why this top one has a higher frequency is by comparing it with the bottom one. So in the bottom one, right, both of the masses are being restored to equilibrium by gravity, right? Whereas in the top, the higher frequency normal mode, right, think about the top mass. It's being restored to equilibrium by gravity, but this lower mass is also pulling it down, right? It's pulling it back towards equilibrium as well. So it gets like this extra force pulling it back towards equilibrium, which means that the whole cycle of the motion will occur more quickly. Okay, so we found the normal modes. Very last thing to do is just note that we can then express the general motion of this double pendulum, assuming the amplitude of the motion is small, as a linear combination of the normal modes, which is pretty cool. So we can write theta 1 as a function of time and theta 2 as a function of time. It's basically going to be some constant, which I'm just going to call a, times our first vector 1 minus root 2 times cos of the higher frequency omega plus t plus some phase, which I guess we could call phi 1, right, plus some other constant, let's call it b, times our other vector 1 and then positive root 2 times cos of omega minus t, the other angular frequency, plus some other phase, which could be different, times phi 2. Now, this actually tells us the general motion of the double pendulum. In order to fix the various constants, a, b, phi 1, and phi 2, you would need to be given 4 different initial conditions, basically. So you could be told the initial displacements, the initial angles, of the double pendulum and the initial velocities. And then you could plug in those various initial conditions and get a set of equations that you could solve to fix a, b, and phi 1 and phi 2.